When death visits is a powerful topic for everyone. When we talk about the hostility we may hold about death and dying, that too is a powerful subject. We're often baffled by how angry or hateful people can be about death and dying. We see it every day, many, many times. A car accident, the closing of a business, the ending of a relationship, changing of a season, taking a tree and chopping it down in your front yard. We have a death all throughout the day, and yet many of us have decided that it is something abhorrent to us. If death is something that happens so frequently throughout every day of our lives, if we hold hatred or disdain for it or fear, what is the consequence to us? Is there a way we can find another way of looking at this? Sometimes it helps to explore how we came to have negative beliefs about death and dying. When asking people what their idea, thought, or belief is about death and dying, whenever they're afraid, you will hear many stories that are similar to these. It will be a story of horrible disfigurement, a terrible accident that causes disfigurement of the body, a prolonged and painful death. Or you will hear stories of natural disasters, being totally unprepared for the horrific storm that comes and creates and causes damage and death. And a prolonged dying with pain, a common fear that most of us hold. For many of us, we have a fear of dying alone. If you've heard stories of someone dying alone and thought about it yourself and pictured yourself dying alone, you will have that fear. Also, when talking about death and dying, people will share their fear that they will not leave a legacy that has any meaning or purpose, that they will have a dying and a death without meaning to their existence. This in itself is a terrible fear. Picturing death and dying in these ways, particularly when we feel afraid, leads us to tend to deny death, to think of other things but death. Or when we are confronted with it in the news or in our daily lives, which we are, we tend to rationalize things away and quickly move on about our daily life, even if many people have died in the incident of which we talk. Many of us tell stories of taking a walk in nature, walking in a forest and coming upon the remains of a four-legged creature, the skeletal remains. And we cringe at it, and we move by quickly. But we think to ourselves, and sometimes share with whomever else saw the skeletal remains, that death scares us so. The experience of approaching a darkened forest can evoke such fears within us when we hold those fears as core beliefs. As we approach the forest, there is a sense of dread if we hold that fear. There is a remembrance of the dying and the dead in such dark places. The possibilities of being attacked, if that is the belief we hold. Quickening our steps, we turn and hurry the other way. And in our turning away, in our fear of death and dying, we take huge chunks of life and separate ourselves from it. and that part of life. And because it is woven into the fabric of life, our doing so wounds us deeper than we know. To maintain it, we must continue and increase denial, rationalization, rejecting death and dying, rejecting even the thought of it, the experience of it around us. If we have disdain for death, and the time comes for us to drop this robe of many colors, a phrase we use to refer to the body, then we cannot see the fierceness of the moment, the immenseness and the grandness of death and its part in the fabric of life. And not meaning to, by looking at death this way, by having these core beliefs and thoughts about death and dying, and seeing pain and loneliness and death as one and the same thing, we become lost in seeking our place in this universe. But if we look closely, perhaps on that walk in the forest, and we come upon a grand oak that has fallen to the forest floor, splitting open, decomposing, and deteriorating, that there is a message there for us of seeing death and dying as nature does. One evening, in just such a forest, I came across a grand oak that had fallen to the forest floor and split open, decomposing, and yet its colors magnificent, with mushrooms and other forest creatures growing on and around it. And I hurried on my way. I hurried in order to get back to where I was staying, because I could feel a poem coming on, having seen this death. Here on a lonely night, alone and in the dark, with only a sliver of moonlight, I am about to embark at the entrance of the wood, at the entrance of the darkest darkness, at the opening of the wood. And like a vessel setting out to sea, I took the steps forward on behalf of no one but me, and found in that action a very strange and peculiar reaction. For stepping into that darkness with all my fears and wonders, worries, anxieties, and blunders of my life, what some call the great unknown, I was not lost nor abandoned, nor was I alone. For all who had gone before me met me on that path that night. And for the gift of being there, they banished all my fright. And none of them were strangers, and none of them unknown. So when you step onto your path and approach that dark night's wood, remember at the entry there, many others before you have stood. And if fear questions entry into that dark wood, remember this, my friend. Remember this. Enter. You should. So we must find a way to make room for the fierceness of this death and dying in our life, because it is so much a part of it. How can we do this? How can we make room for death and dying in our lives? We must find a way that when it is found, like in the dark woods, it will illuminate our path perhaps then, and only then, we can come to grant hospitality to death.